I think we are at time, so just want to welcome everybody. Thank you guys for joining us today. I posted some housekeeping items in the chat for you all, but feel free to post any questions through you might have for Sarah in the chat or in the QA. Other than that, I just want to introduce you guys to our speaker today, Sarah, and yeah, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Kelleher. Yeah, thanks for joining this session today. Before we get stuck in, just a bit of an intro to me. So I am Sarah Kelleher, the Customer Success Director for Nebula Consulting. We are a Salesforce and Pardot consulting partner based in London in the UK. And I've been working with Pardot for 8 years now. And you'll often find me at the London Pardot user group and in the Pardot Slack channel. So over the years, I have implemented and supported the platform for hundreds of different organizations, from small SMBs with very lean marketing teams through to large multinationals with hundreds of users. So I've seen what makes it work and perhaps more importantly, what doesn't. And in that time, Pardot itself has changed not only name, now account engagement, but it's changed from a really SMB focused tool into something that's much more sophisticated and allows it to compete with the heavy hitters in the enterprise marketing automation space. So I've seen global enterprise businesses choosing account engagement Pardot more and more, but how does this famously simple tool fit the bill for a multinational organization? And that's what this session is going to be about. I'm going to be sharing some of my best practices and tips for success when operating in multiple regions across the globe. So just going to take a moment to say thank you to the organisers and sponsors of Mardreaming. This is a huge event and takes a huge amount of effort to put together. So I'm sure everyone over the next few days will find something valuable to take away. So just want to thank all of the folks involved in that. So our objective for today's session, we're going to identify 2 key strategies for operating a successful marketing automation function in a multinational organization. And although I'll be presenting these themes in the context of Pardot or account engagement, there are certainly transferable lessons for any marketing automation tool. Firstly, I'm going to cover exactly what I mean by global. So although typically this tends to refer to larger organizations, any company which has multiple marketing teams distributed across the globe is what I refer to by global. And in this simple example, for the structure of a potential global business, we have one central team working with high-level regional teams across Americas, APAC, and EMEA, respectively. So obviously each organization is going to arrange their regions differently, which is a business strategy decision. But however they cut and slice the globe, these principles that I talk about will still apply. Equally, many of the principles I'm going to outline will apply to any organizations with dispersed marketing teams of any type. So whether that's based on region, product line, brand, audience type, it may still apply. So whatever size or shape company you work for, there should be something useful for you in this session. So let's get into it then. Clearly, defining a successful global marketing automation strategy is a very vast topic and something that takes a lot longer than 25 minutes. So I'm going to focus on 2 key themes here. So firstly, people. We're going to talk about how to create the right team and how to empower those people. And then structure, how to define ownership of your overall org and balance collaboration and decentralization. So jumping right in then to the people section, I have seen all sorts of configurations of marketing teams over the years, but the most successful recipes include 3 broad functions. In one corner, you have your central marketing function, who typically cover the administration of Pardot and own the platform from the company HQ. They might also be referred to as global marketing, marketing ops, center of excellence, HQ, so on. Then you have your regional users, the day-to-day marketing teams who are developing and delivering your campaigns. And in somewhere in the middle, you have a group of super users, which may also be known as champions or power users. So these super users are a really vital ingredient here. So let's take a look at that role in more detail. Having a network of champions, typically one representative from each regional team, creates an incredibly powerful function which operates somewhere between the technology and the business teams. These champions act as a bridge between two groups who often have quite different objectives. On one hand, they truly understand the needs of the end users that they represent because they are part of those regional teams. But they also have the added expertise and passion for the platform to collaborate with central marketing and really advocate for Pardot to make sure that centrally designed practices and processes are embedded in day-to-day use. So these users have a really unique viewpoint of how Pardot is used in the organization. They appreciate the need for central governance and understand the technical basis for marketing processes. And they also represent the regional nuances and context which their teams need to apply to those central initiatives. So because of this best of both worlds position, they are able to enable and empower their teams as an advocate for Pardot. And they're also consulted by central marketing in the design of new processes and ensure that their region's needs are fully represented. And in return, these folks often become part of a network with super users from other regions and may have more privileges in the system, for example, more rights to automation or advanced reporting features. And that comes along with things like maybe enhanced training programs, networking opportunities, and knowledge sharing sessions as well. The success of that Champions program, if you are looking to set one up, really lies in these people's ability to be a powerful representative both for the platform and for the regional teams they're a part of. And when successfully implemented, this can create an amazing network which drives adoption, improves knowledge sharing, and it can foster real innovation on the marketing automation platform. So this win-win setup is the heart of the team you need to create to be successful. But how do we then go on to empower these users? The first real part of empowering your people is making sure that you're focusing on the right people and then making sure that you're enabling them across the right objectives. So we've already established what that core team should look like, your three main functions of central marketing, champions, and regional users. But now we need to look beyond that core set and include other groups whose roles cross into the Pardot sphere. So this might include senior stakeholders who need to see marketing impact on pipeline. It might include IT or Salesforce admins who need to ensure that any marketing processes are carefully considered in the wider landscape of your other systems, such as CRM, website, finance. And then your sales users who will be surfacing and interacting with that marketing engagement data in their conversations with customers every day. So now we've identified who we need to empower. We need to ensure that we're giving them the right tools for success. So whilst there is still a really great place for classroom training, recorded training, we also need to look beyond those things to really inspire adoption within someone's daily role. So we need to understand their user journey and how we can weave Pardot into the fabric of where they're working and what they're doing every day. We also need to really explain the why of Pardot. Why are we asking them to follow the processes and what's in it for them? And the system does have a lot of out-of-the-box features and functions that support this empowerment and enablement process. Salesforce has talked a lot this year about easy. So they've launched Salesforce Easy. So making Pardot easy is something that we can do as well. And that falls broadly into three categories. So firstly, user experience. It's no surprise that the UX designer certification has been so popular this year. UX is so important when you're designing and rolling out systems. And there are loads of features that can make interacting with Pardot data totally embedded in the day-to-day activities of lots of roles. This particularly applies to the sales and senior stakeholder groups. So this is in fact one of my favorite Pardot features and the embedded engagement history dashboards, and you can see an image of that there on an account record. So next on our journey to easy, we need to focus on permissions. So ensuring that your users have the right permissions is really critical in two ways. Firstly, users need adequate access to see everything they need to do in their jobs. It is really infuriating to get halfway through executing a campaign only to be met with a red banner and not to be able to meet your deadline or execute your campaign. But equally, it's important to ensure that users don't have too much access. Seeing 1,000 irrelevant lists or campaigns or having access to globally automated processes is at best a pain and at worst dangerous. So you need to map out your users carefully and think about who needs to see what. And lastly, it's not called marketing automation for nothing. Automating all those annoying manual tasks that users are doing each day frees up their time for more innovative and strategic initiatives. Pardot should really be a tool to help people, not hinder them. And that's what this is all about. The number of organizations I come across who are still exporting Salesforce reports and importing them manually via CSV is astonishing. So when we think about automation, it doesn't have to be complex engagement programs or flows. Just replacing a manually updated list with a dynamic one could save your users hours each month. And really, that's the ultimate quick win. So now on our journey to global marketing automation success, we have found our people, we've empowered them, and now we need to decide who owns what. So what do the regional users look after and what sits under global control? And this is where we start talking about genuine ownership. And what do I mean when I talk about ownership of marketing automation? Really, what I'm talking about is defining the model for who looks after what in your marketing strategy and finding the balance between top-down central governance and regional independence. Ownership and defining this is really critical to ensure that all the moving parts of your platform work together. Because poorly defined responsibility leads to duplication of effort, important details being missed, user frustration, and ultimately non-adoption. So let's return to this example of our potential global organization structure. And when thinking about the Pardot platform, there are some parts of your strategy which have to be consistent. Governance needs to be defined centrally and distributed in a top-down fashion across the business and implemented consistently by each regional team. So this needs to be highly collaborative with the regional teams and central marketing working together. For example, deciding on how the integration between Salesforce and Pardot will work, or your legal data handling policies. Then there are other areas which need a higher degree of flexibility. So things that might have regional or cultural differences depending on where they're being executed. For example, your regular newsletters or your holiday campaigns. And these are areas which will need to be decentralized, giving regional teams the freedom to operate independently of other regions. So these are broadly the two ends of the spectrum of ownership. And let's have a look at what that means when we apply some context. So it's not quite as simple as opting for a totally common approach versus a totally decentralized approach. And there is a huge degree of flex between that. Ownership of each area is on a spectrum, and each organization is going to fall on a different part of that scale, maybe even shifting around as time goes on and the market changes. Typically, as organizations scale, there's a tendency for more things to become decentralized, often out of necessity, but this is by no means gospel. So if we illustrate this by looking at the data can of worms. On one end, you have an entirely open sharing model where users can access, segment, and market to all records. This creates a really simple structure, but it can also raise governance concerns, particularly around regional privacy laws and, as you scale, the capacity for human error. On the other end, you could have a totally segregated model with multiple distinct partitions of data, which means users can only access data which belongs to their team. So whilst this creates more confidence from a governance and security perspective, it can introduce challenges with architecture, permissions, and duplication, potentially creating unnecessary technical debt. So therefore, many companies are going to land somewhere in the middle, perhaps having some way of controlling which regions have access to which data, but with some degree of flex where it makes logical sense for a record to be shared. For example, a prospect might live and work in the US, but attend an event in Germany, and thinking about how you handle that between your different users will help guide you into who owns that data. So if you are operating this kind of business, how do you work out where you fall on this scale? So to understand where your business lies on the spectrum of ownership, you need to consider a few key points. Firstly, how are your other processes structured? For example, if your sales data is heavily locked down, this is going to influence your marketing data structure because an open marketing data sharing model is not going to be appropriate alongside that. Next, what's your team structure? It may be ideal to have centrally created email templates, but if you only have one central marketing manager with limited capacity, decentralizing template creation is going to become necessary. Have you already defined ownership, and can you name the responsible owner? It's really critical during this that everyone knows who owns each of these areas. Otherwise, you get into a situation where users are being passed from pillar to post and everyone thinks someone else is responsible. So take ownership, write it down, and share it. And lastly, how will the tech support your chosen model? So absolutely, your tech should be defined by your strategy and not the other way around. But it's important to understand what the tools you have will do out of the box versus what will need to be custom. So every business analyst in the room will tell you not to solutionize when defining your objectives, but you do need to keep one foot on the ground and make sure where you land is technically possible. So if you're ready to undertake a significant project to heavily customize your systems, then great. But if you don't have the budget, resource, or timeline to do that, you will have to color within the lines a little more carefully. So with that said, let's have a look at the two main ways you might structure your Pardot org depending on where you're operating on this scale in your global business. So if you're a global organization, chances are someone at Salesforce or your implementation partner has mentioned business units. So just a note here for more, as I know we're a fairly wide marketing cloud audience, this is Pardot business unit specifically, different feature to marketing cloud business units. So believe it or not, Pardot business units have been around for over 3.5 years, but the proportion of customers using them is still very low. They essentially represent a structural option for global businesses to give a lot of autonomy to their regional users very quickly. So these are a way of creating partitioned areas of the Pardot app in which marketing teams can separate out data, marketing assets, account setup, users, segmentation, preferences, everything. They're effectively independent instances of Pardot spun up from a single Salesforce org. And in the example here, this org has 2 separate areas of Pardot independently managed for 2 regional teams. So they're a way to very quickly decentralize all of your processes. But it does mean that there are some limitations for collaboration down your business unit if you go down the business units route. And there are currently still a lot of changes happening around this feature. But what we need to think about is, as with everything Salesforce, currently available functionality, and more about where it puts you in as a starting point, in that you're aiming for decentralization, and then you can bring it back to a more collaborative approach if needed. So you have business units on the table, but how do you decide whether to opt for a single global instance or to move into separate business units? There's obviously loads of factors involved, but let's have a look at how the ownership spectrum might influence that decision. So generally speaking, opting for a single global org will set your baseline to highly collaborative on the left of this scale. And then any customizations you make will be to lock certain things down and to become more decentralized. On the other end, splitting out into business units effectively sets your baseline to highly decentralized, and then you can customize the system to become more collaborative. So depending on where you want to end up, that should give you a good idea of where you want to start. So let's start with a data example to illustrate this. If there's no clear-cut ownership of prospect data and all teams are allowed to see and market your whole database, this is a highly collaborative approach, and a single org might be the best place to start. However, if it's very clearly defined that each market should only see and communicate with records who fit certain criteria, then a more decentralized business units approach starts to look more appropriate. Similarly, with preference management, if a prospect record unsubscribes, how should this impact other marketing teams? In a single org, once a prospect unsubscribes, they no longer receive any communications from your organization, no matter which team is sending them. With business units, a prospect unsubscribed from one team's communications does not impact their opt-in status in another unit. Of course, there's a huge gray area in between that can be achieved with customization, but what we're looking at here is what makes most sense as the starting point. So if you're already using Pardot in a single org, going through this exercise of mapping out where you sit on the spectrum of ownership could help you to understand if there's any potential to be unlocked with a move to business units. So I'm just going to round out this topic again by expressing the importance of defining who owns what in your marketing automation platform, and do this before you try to design your architecture. So remember, the strategy should always come first, and the strategy should drive your technology and not the other way around. So this was a very quick fly through of how to build a successful marketing automation function in a global organization. And just to summarize, we need to make sure we're building the right team with those 3 core functions, and we need to make sure we're empowering the right people in the right way. And then we need to look at balancing the collaboration and decentralization of each area of your marketing automation platform to make sure that you know who owns what and how to define your org structure based on that business strategy and ownership. Okay, so that's it from me, and we have some time for Q&A, which is great. So I think Kelleher's going to come back to moderate some Q&A. And if there are any questions we don't get time for as well, please do feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, Twitter, or on the Pardot Slack channel.
Awesome. Great session, Sarah. We do have one question in the Q&A. Kim asked, can you explain what you mean by do not solutionize?
Yes, of course. So what I mean by that is that when you're sort of thinking about your business strategy, we need to think about not trying to let the technology dictate your business objectives. So you shouldn't come up with a technical solution before you've decided on the business strategy.
Great, thank you. And then Emily has a question here. If we have one Salesforce org, can we still use the business units within Pardot?
Yes, and that's exactly what business units is designed for. So it's designed for organizations where you have one central Salesforce org, and that's being used business-wide, but you might want to separate out your marketing efforts into distinct business units. For example, if you have one parent organization with multiple either regional teams or product teams who operate largely independently of one another.
Awesome. And then maybe time for one more. Christy asked, what changes do you anticipate for Pardot next year? That is a loaded question.
That is a loaded question. I guess main question would be probably head to the roadmap session that's happening during the conference in the next couple of days. But generally speaking, from a kind of global organization perspective, I think the direction of travel is to allow more customization in that gray area that I was talking about. So at the moment, if you go collaborative in a single org, you're kind of limited with what you can lock down. And then if you go decentralized with multiple business units, you're a little bit limited with how much you can collaborate, or it's quite difficult to collaborate across the two. And there are a lot of changes on the roadmap, making it simpler to really customize that and get that sharing model working, I think, a bit more seamlessly, no matter what your setup.
Great. Oh, one more. I think we still have time. I see a few minutes left. So one more in the chat. If we manage separate brands, but a single small team with full access, do we still want to use business units?
That is a good and common question, actually, around whether, so teams can use multiple business units. I would say that really the way that your team works with each brand is what should help drive that decision for you. So when there are instances, where if you have very defined brand templates, lists, data, that sort of thing, then business units might still be appropriate, but with giving users access to multiple business units. If your teams if there's a lot of crossover in your audiences, you're sharing a lot of marketing assets and things like list creation and template creation across the multiple brands, then it may not make sense to carve those out into separate business units, because it does effectively become a separate mini Pardot account. So if you have lots of users operating across multiple, it can introduce, I guess, workflow challenges for them. But depending on how separate those brands are, it might work out well to do that. I guess typically when we're talking about brands, one of the key considerations is often preference management. So if you want somebody to be able to unsubscribe from one brand and not another more easily, and manage that data independently for each brand, business unit starts to become a much easier option to look at. Cool.
Great. Well, Sarah, I just want to say thank you again so much for your time as we get ready to wrap here. To all of our attendees, make sure that you pop over into the sponsor booths after this to show our sponsors some love. And also, we have a ton of great sessions coming up for you this afternoon, so be sure to hop into those. And thank you again, Sarah, and thank you everyone for attending today's session as well. All right. And
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.